The short answer is to kill people. The better answer is power. Look through any example that's given in either modern or ancient history. The civilization was the best form of a weapon wins. In ancient civilization, the man who used the sharpened stick was able to beat a man who was defenseless. Then you have the evolution from the Bronze Age into the Age of Iron. Those who had iron weapons, first were the Hittites, were able to defeat their adversaries and grow their empires. Eventually, you go into time periods that use guns. Civilizations that had guns, let's say, I don't know, the Germans, versus people that didn't have guns like the Ottoman Empire, quickly lost and then collapsed. In the modern world, we have one supreme use of weaponry without me going completely sci-fi. Nuclear weapons. These are the most efficient and powerful killing machines known to man. Unfortunately, they should be illegalized, and there are several reasons for that. So why do we have nukes? Two reasons that we even have nuclear programs at all: energy and power. Nuclear energy is something that is highly efficient, not that dangerous, and something that does provide a great use for our society, so this should not be an elimination of all nuclear technology. However, on the weapons side of it, there is no positive, in today's society at least, to maintaining the use of nuclear weapons. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union were able to develop nuclear weapons. But what did this lead to? Unreasonably high tensions. The Cuban Missile Crisis, we were minutes away from not only obliterating several American and Soviet cities, but from causing enough radiation to effectively wipe out the entire population of the Eastern Seaboard and all of Western Russia, not to mention contaminating the entire environment of all countries, poisoning water sources, and creating holes in our atmosphere, creating what is effectively known as nuclear winter that would affect the entire globe and kill off billions, if not the entire human population. There are several other downsides to nuclear weapons as well. First, there's supreme power of being destructive. Is that 5 minutes?
No, sorry, that's 2. Sorry.
Oh, okay, I got 3, and then I'm saying that went fast. Their destructive power. In World War II, we didn't even use nuclear weapons. We used atomic bombs, which is something that looks like a firecracker next to a nuclear weapon. And yet we effectively were able to kill around 70,000 people by simply flying a plane over and dropping 2 atomic bombs. Areas, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, effectively almost 6 digits of people killed, and areas that remain uninhabitable and still leave a bitter taste in the Japanese mouth about Americans today. Not to mention poisoning all of the nearby water, disrupting the flow of the ecosystem nearby, harming dozens of God knows types of animals, and so on. What's the purpose to all of that? Yes, we do need weapons, but not ones that contaminate the entire globe. Building off of that, as I already mentioned, there is the side effect of nuclear winter and other effects on the Earth. If we use a nuke, we're not just eliminating our opponents, we're eliminating ourselves. There's a reason that there's an acronym called MAD. It's mutually assured destruction. The use of a nuclear weapon doesn't win wars. It kills humanity. Furthermore, I'd like to also say that nukes are now unnecessary because of the new powers that we possess. If anybody in this room has ever heard of a program called Project Zeus, yes, it was used in the movie G.I. Joe, but it is actually a real thing, I promise. What Project Zeus does, and this is something that's already been put into effect, is there are satellites put into orbit around the globe by the United States government that contain long rods of tungsten and titanium. Now what happens is, the rods are dropped from God knows how many hundreds of thousands of feet, and they spiral into the earth at a tremendous speed and make an impact. The impact created by these rods does the same effective amount of damage as a nuclear weapon, is even harder to stop than an ICBM, and has absolutely no radiation or harmful side effects to, other than, of course, what it's intended to do, which is actually pretty harmful, but no radioactive side effects. So, I ask you, in a time where we have the ability to have the same exact killing power by using more advanced technology and maintain our supremacy as a world superpower without effectively eliminating everybody on Earth as well as species that are necessary for the ecosystem to survive, why should we continue to have massive stockpiles of weapons that we cannot even use, that are just used to say, oh, well, you know, our scientists can effectively use and create nuclear weapons. That's something that we obviously do for society. Other than that, they're not used for anything other than assuring our own destruction. Thank you very much. Here comes the pain.
Well, anyway, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to debate such a great competitor.
Touche.
And you brought up a lot of great points. But I basically have one central question with your whole argument.
Yes, sir.
And that's that, do do you not think that nuclear capability is the great equalizer humanity has always needed? Because early on, in your first 2 minutes, you discussed how the side with the most powerful guns and weapons won every war, whether it was the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, or the man with the stronger stick, or the United States and Japan.
Is there a question here?
The question is nuclear capability that great equalizer we've always needed? If every state in the world had nuclear weapon capability, would we have that logic of mutually assured destruction? And would that prevent any ruler in their right mind from using a nuclear weapon, knowing full well that if they were to do so, they would guarantee the obliteration and annihilation of those they're chosen to represent?
Absolutely not. I'd like to point out that we purposely keep Iran from developing nuclear weapons because they simply do not care. Simple, if Iran was to launch a nuke at Israel, who has nuclear capability, they are aware that them and everybody around them would be wiped out.
That's
and if they continue
certainly
to strike.
debatable, but obviously you
It's a great
acknowledge
concern
that
for you.
in making that point, you're basically alleging that the leadership of Iran is irrational, because a rational human being that wants to live would know full well that were they to fire one nuke at South Florida, they would be annihilated by thousands of nukes in the arsenal of the United States of America. Do you believe that
I believe that it would be known, but if
that would be
you were-
irrational to make that decision?
It would be, but it doesn't mean that that decision would be made, period. If a country is going to go to war and is considering even using a weapon of this magnitude, I would argue that almost all rationale or other options have gone out the window to even be in the situation to begin with.
Okay. Well, I would definitely point out that that is assuming irrationality by the actors who are possessing the nuclear weapons. If you know that you're going to be destroyed, that's mutually assured destruction. That's what I would argue is the reason, as nuclear weapons have proliferated, and now as Russia and Israel and France and Great Britain and so many of these powerful countries have nuclear weapons, we prevented full-out nuclear warfare, and the world's actually a safer place. And now, finally, I'd ask you one more question. Do you think it's in the United States' national interest to maintain a nuclear stockpile?
A nuclear stockpile, no. Now, I'm going to make 2 quick points. Firstly, I'm not saying that this wasn't necessary for a period of evolution. Absolutely, during the Cold War, during the atomic age, before that in the 30s and 40s, and even all the way up till we had the ability to come up with something like Project Zeus. This is something that was absolutely necessary because it was the most powerful weapon available. Now, when we have the same capability for something that is a lot less dangerous, not only to ourselves, but to everybody else, it's a good thing. And can you please just ask the second point of the second question that you, the very last question again?
I would just ask you if it's in the United States' national interest to maintain nuclear weapons, to have that power. Although Project Zeus might be a great thing, should we allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good? Or is it nice to have some semi-automatic weapons and some pistols in the Army?
Is that 3 minutes or 10?
That's 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you.
Very good.
Great. You guys want to do this prayer,
You want the prep?
You can take that if you'd like.
I'm good. Go for it.
or? Okay.
All right, well, thank you for this opportunity to debate a great topic. Now, my central argument is completely opposite to that of Mike's. I think that nuclear weapons should not only be banned, but they should be spread. That every nation in the world should have an opportunity to have a nuclear weapon, because that creates, as he touched on earlier, the logic of mutually assured destruction. When a state knows that it will be eliminated from the face of the earth if it uses a nuclear weapon against another state, it becomes incredibly irrational for that state to use the nuclear weapon in the first place. Mike touched on the horrible consequences of using nuclear weapons. I'm not a warmongering guy who wants to see acid rain and the horrible things you talked about. In fact, I want to make sure that nuclear weapons are never again used on human beings or on a state in the course of warfare. Spreading nuclear weapons around makes sure that that won't happen. If we trust human beings to be rational, a suicide bomber is not rational. And that goes to the very heart of why we want to make sure that Iran and certain rogue nations cannot get their hands on nuclear weapons. Yeah, my second point is the morality of human beings. I think once the world and America were able to see the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki of atomic bombs, to see the destruction for generations to come that was caused by those, we never again have seen the use of a nuclear weapon or an atomic bomb. I don't think we're going to see it again in our lifetimes, or hopefully for the rest of human history. Human beings do not like to kill each other. They only do so out of real necessity to achieve political ends. Now, the political aim, I think, of every state, even if they have different views on the economy or on human rights, is mostly to survive. With the logic of mutually assured destruction, spreading nuclear weapons ensures that, again, that nuclear weapons won't be used. And thirdly, I look at the extreme difficulty and, or rather the impossibility of implementing such a ban. As we see with climate change, certain countries have been asked to cut down on carbon emissions, but there's no global policeman to make sure that they're going to do so. And as we saw in our previous debate with Ms. Landis, who's in the room and did a great job, I might add, if you were to ask the American people to give up their assault weapons, you would not see all of them giving up their assault weapons. The law-abiding citizens would. Those in the gangs who have come across these assault weapons, who are going to use it for the most dangerous intent, are the ones who are not going to surrender those weapons. In fact, they'll hide them. We're going to see that with rogue states if we implement this policy of banning nuclear weapons. If France and the United States surrender their weapons and behave by the treaty or the protocol that is signed by signatory states, certain states won't. And that makes the world a more dangerous and unbalanced place. So yes, if we ban nuclear weapons, we're never going to be able to see this actually implemented. We're going to lose the logic of mutually assured destruction by definition, and we're going to make the world necessarily a more dangerous and hostile environment where we once again might see the terrible and horrific consequences Mike touched on. That's all I have.
Okay.
Over here.
Oh, no, you spoke, you can say.
All right.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you for an incredibly well thought out and well-spoken speech. I just have a few quick questions for you. So what do we do if a nuclear missile is given to a state that is irrational and has an incompetent leader? Do we simply say, well, your past leader might have had it, but we're going to now take it away from you, and then, I don't know, either the US or the United Nations to get it? Like, what do we do if a country that either doesn't have a nuke or previously does have a nuke has an irrational leader? How do we go about solving that?
Well, luckily, we don't have to do much because of the nuclear weapons we possess that are hidden throughout the country and in nuclear warehouses. The very existence of those nuclear weapons, I would argue, is going to prevent any petty dictator in the world who has their hands on a nuclear weapon or any terrorist organization from using those with nefarious intentions to hurt Americans.
I would say that only applies to rational human beings, not irrational ones. Going off of that,
I wouldn't dispute that, Mike. I actually wouldn't. If we're dealing with an irrational actor, you might be right. They might, in a suicide attempt, engage in that. But I do believe that, as a rule of thumb, human beings are irrational, and are rational, and that example does not outweigh the great things that are achieved by having the existence of nuclear weapons in so many hands proliferated around the world.
okay, I'd like to move on to my next question. So, seeing as there are only 7 countries that currently have nuclear capability, the US, Great Britain, France, Pakistan, India, and Israel. And
North Korea does as well.
North Korea, but at least they thankfully don't have a delivery system. Oh, but let's use your example of North Korea. What logical reason is there for giving an established, super oppressive regime a nuclear weapon that has a super big desire to use it? Where is the logic in that? They know we have nukes, they don't care.
Well, that's a tender situation. It involves really working hard to make sure they won't use it. But again, we know that they're not going to use it against a state with a nuclear weapon. They might, unfortunately, use it against South Korea, who doesn't have nuclear weapons, who's their neighbor to the south. I think we need to get 20 nuclear weapons to South Korea to give them the luxury we have of knowing that we'll never be attacked by a nuclear weapon, because we have such a stockpile of them, frankly, that we can destroy anybody who would ever think about using them against us. We need to be giving every country in the world nuclear weapons, not banning them from good countries that will play by the rules while leaving terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda who fly planes into buildings with nuclear weapons in their hands, but then nobody to make them pay the price and punish them for using those with negative intentions.
Well, let me ask you, there aren't that, outside of the United States has about, I would say, half the nuclear missiles that exist in the entire world, yet the majority of the rest belong to the Soviet Union, where the rest of the countries don't have nearly as many missiles as the two of them put together. Which means there aren't a lot of nukes for us to go out there and find and bring back and destroy. So wouldn't it make more sense to eliminate all of the nuclear weapons while leaving the United States as the only country in the world that has that kind of power left? Wouldn't it make more sense to do that than to give everybody a weapon of mass destruction?
No.
Why would it not make sense to do that?
I touched on that for my 5 minutes, I thought. But that's time's up. So now, thank you, Mike. Thanks.